Good morning, everyone. Sometimes when you're in a dark place, you think you've been buried, but you've actually been planted. Let's join together now as I ring the Tibetan bowl as a call to service. Listening as the sound fills the sanctuary and then recedes back into the silence. This is the time to open our hearts and minds to what this service can bring.
Schlaf, mein Kind, schlaf gesede, singen will ich dir ein Lied. Als du, mein Kind, wirst älter werden, wirst du wissen an Unterschied. Als du, mein Kind, wirst älter werden, wirst du wissen an Unterschied. Als du, mein Kind, wirst älter werden, wirst du werden mit Leiden gleich, da musst wirst du geweuer werden. Was ist eurem und was ist reich? Als du, mein Kind, wirst älter werden, wirst du wissen an Unterschied. Die teuerste Platz in die schönste Häuser, das als Macht der eurer Mann. No weißt du, wer es tut in sie wohnen, gar nicht der, nur der reiche Mann. Schlaf, mein Kind, schlaf gesede, singen will ich dir ein Lied. Als du, mein Kind, wirst älter werden, wirst du wissen an Unterschied.
Thank you, Michael. Well, good morning. Good morning and welcome, Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River, to the sanctuary, in the sanctuary, and those as well who are with us on Zoom. Welcome to this church that is relevant in our lives and is active in the world and grounded in love and justice. Perhaps you join us this morning seeking community. Perhaps you're seeking comfort after a difficult week, personally or in the world. Perhaps it's for a deepening spirituality. Wherever you are on your life's path, we welcome you this morning. My name is Annie Lavin, and I'm your service leader. This morning, we gather here in this sanctuary, a half a world away from the chaos of war. But we as well are deeply affected and touched by the violence and the suffering because, as you know, pain has no boundaries, and we too can feel the presence of fear close at hand as it fuels anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and hate crimes that also infect our country, our community, ourselves. Our UU President, Dr. Sophia Benecourt, reminds us that we are one global family living tenuously on the same human-impacted planet, and it is our work to center ourselves as we call for peace and justice. This morning, we welcome Dr. Gary Schiff to our pulpit again. I invited Gary to speak to us, as other churches have done, for his personal knowledge and insight on Israel as the war on Hamas continues. As a faith tradition, Unitarian Universalists have long worked for peace, and our principles and values call for us to be vigilant and informed as we have compassion for all God's children caught in the violence. Our hope is that today's service will be a step closer toward this end. I'll share some of Gary's background for the very few who may not know more about him. He is the founding cantor and religious leader of the Chestertown Havurah, adjunct professor of history at Washington College, teaching courses on Jewish and Middle East history. Gary has he has more than three, he has many degrees, but 3 graduate ones from Yeshiva and Columbia universities. He has been a college president and professor at Gratz in Philadelphia, where I've done some graduate work, I'm proud to say, and has published 4 books, the most recent one on the history of Jews in the Polish town where his family lived from the 1700s to the Holocaust. His sermon today is titled, "Is It Never Again?" or Holocaust 2.1. We look forward to this. Our accompanist is musician Michael Casey, for whom we're always grateful, and gratitude to all who help with the service today. Your names are in the order of service. For announcements, and we have a few, thanks to everyone who has voted for their preference regarding the Doris Scott bequest. The posters have been moved into the foyer. You'll see them right out there. If you haven't already voted, please do so. At this time, 50% of the congregation has voted. After service today, you're going to buy your tickets for our soup sampler on December the 8th. It's the fundraising committee will be on hand to take your check today. It's $20, and it'll be a wonderful evening, so make sure you're part of that. And then just a couple other things. I looked at next weekend, and you're going to be busy if you're part of it, if you're going to engage. On Friday, we have the November potluck. On Saturday, right here, we have Philip Dutton, who's giving a benefit concert for the Menary's Dream. And that's going to be a wonderful evening of song and stories, and that's on Saturday. Sunday, we have our intergenerational Thanksgiving service, and at 4:00 in the afternoon, head on over to Rock Hall, and you'll catch Michael Casey, who's going to be playing some wonderful French impressionistic music. I think that's all. I want to make sure I catch them all because it's a busy time of year and we want to support all of this. Okay. So I think we're ready to begin the service. So join with me as we light the chalice. The words are in your order of service. May the fire of love burning deep. And our first hymn this morning is number 318 in the gray hymnal, "We Would Be One." Please stand as you are able. In our opening words this morning, I wanted to address the feelings of helplessness and being overwhelmed that we all experience with the news feeds that are released daily. And so what can we do as Unitarian Universalists? Reverend Sue in October addressed this when she wrote on the values of paying deep attention at this time and to be witness for all that is happening. The role of witness is not a passive one. In the role of witness, we listen to those closer to the experience than we and let ourselves feel with them. It may lead us to the next step of compassion and support for those who are struggling. As we focus on those in need, as we focus on the issues at hand, as we stay informed, perhaps attending vigils, being there for those who need us, we are responding to the global call for action against hatred in our own way, in our own time, as we are able. I'll include the words by poet Martha Pottswaite in ending. She says, "Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue." We will now have the acknowledgements of the heart, that special time in the service when we share joys and concerns with each other. I will light the first candle, just looking at the globe, which is in such unrest. It will be for world peace. Are there any other joys or concerns? This is most unusual for this chatty group. Of course, I could light all the candles for peace and put them there.
Thank you. Well, this is a challenge, I would think, and I don't know how to go about it. I would love a little input. I have an associate, that's all he is. He's not my friend, but he visits me occasionally, and he is extremely prejudiced towards everybody that isn't white, okay? Whether it be, he calls them all kinds of names, but, you know, should I just confront him and say, listen, you know, I mean, how do I handle that? You know, I mean, I would like a little feedback on that because I don't want to, I mean, his beliefs are his beliefs, don't get me wrong, and he's entitled to them. But I really don't like what he says, and it upsets me. And I bite my tongue and don't say anything, you know? So I don't know if that's the best thing to do, or should I really just lash out at him?
Unfortunately, many of us have that experience, and let's talk about that during coffee, because it's certainly prevalent in our society and in our lives. It needs to be addressed. Yeah.
We have Diane and Kevin.
Hi, I'm here. Kevin's up, but he's getting his coffee. He was doing really well until Friday morning. He got up to use the bathroom about 6:30 in the morning and fell.
Oh.
He popped his hip out of joint. And fortunately, the ER came very quickly, and it was very reassuring to see our own Bob Coleman as part of the crew. They took him directly to Christiana ER, which is where he had his surgery. And the amazing thing is, this is the good part, they were able to sedate him and just push that hip back into joint, so no surgery needed. So we were both fearing the worst and back to square one, but he's doing better. He's got a brace that he has to wear on his knee to keep that leg straight. So he's back to using the walker and can't really get in and out of the car too well, but he'll be back. So just, yeah, happy it is as good as it is.
Thank you, Diane. Our love to you both.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Did you have your hand up? Let us have a moment to reflect on all the joys and sorrows that perhaps we haven't shared today. Amen. And now it's time for the offertory, when we give our gifts freely as we say yes to the values of this faith and support this church that is special to so many of us, a place of memory and of hope, for we are the keepers of the flame.
Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst am letzten Weg. Gott himmle bleiner verstellen neue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird der Projekt an unser Trott mir seinen Do. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird der Projekt an unser Trott mir seinen Do. Von grünen Palmenland bis weißen Land von Schnee. Wir kommen an mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und wo gefallen sie, Spritz von unser Blut? Sprotzen wird dort unser Gwure, unser Mut. Und wo gefallen sie, Spritz von unser Blut? Sprotzen wird dort unser Gwure, unser Mut. Es wird die Morgensonne begilden uns dem Heind. Und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Noch einfach zusammen mit die Sonnen geht kein Jahr. Wie ein Parol so gehen das Lied von Dorf zu Dorf. Noch einfach zusammen wird die Sonnen der kein Jahr. Wie ein Parol so gehen das Lied von Dorf zu Dorf. Das Lied geschrieben ist mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Lied von der Feugerlafter frei. Das hat der Volk zwischen Fallen die gewähnt. Das Lied gesungen mit ner Garnis in die Hand. Das hat der Volk zwischen Fallen die gewähnt. Das Lied gesungen mit ner Garnis in die Hand.
Thank you, Michael. That was great. And now we come together for a moment of centering as we let our minds settle down from the pain that fills the world. The wonderful writer C.S. Lewis says this about pain. Pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks to us in our conscience, but he shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. And so we attend to this pain while balancing alongside of all else that life is bringing, keeping a balance so that we can live purposefully in this world of unrest. We'll include the words of UU minister Lynn Unger, who speaks to this as she says, "Tell me, how do you live? With grief, with fear, with laughter, with boredom, with glee, with contentment, with fury, with hope, and with the firm conviction that no one thing can ever cancel anything else out. Death does not cancel life. Grief does not cancel joy. Fear does not cancel conviction. Make your heart a bowl that is large enough to hold them all. Imagine that you're a potter. Stretch the clay, cherish the turning wheel, accept that the bowl is never going to be perfect. It's never going to be finished. And now we have our responsive reading. If you look in the order of service, you'll see an insert. The responsive reading is on one side, and on the other will be a prayer and a chant that we will be doing after Gary's talk. So now we'll look at the responsive reading, For Nothing is Fixed, and it's by the wonderful writer James Baldwin. I'll read the heavy print, and if you will respond. For nothing is fixed. Forever and forever and forever. It is not fixed. The earth is always shifting, the land is always changing, and the sea does not cease to grind down rock. Generations do not cease to be born. And we are responsible to them because we are the only witnesses they have. The sea rises and the light fails. Lovers cling to each other and children cling to us. The moment we cease to hold each other, the moment we break faith with one another, the sea engulfs us and the light goes out. And now I invite Gary to our podium for his talk to us this morning.
I'm a little guy. Good morning. Pleasure to be back here again. And thanks, Annie, for inviting me. And thanks, Michael, for the selection of the 3 musical pieces. I don't know if you all know what they are, but I'll tell you what they are. The first is Schlaf mein Kind. It's a Yiddish, in Yiddish, and a mother saying to her baby, Sleep, my child. It's a beautiful piece. The second one, Zognit Kemo, is right on time. It is the Jewish martyrs hymn that Jewish fighters, resistance fighters during the war wrote. And the first line, Zognit Kemo, means, never say we're on the last road. And the last one, the postal, which you will hear, Oseh Shalom, is in Hebrew, and it's the final line of the Kaddish Memorial prayer, which says, he who makes peace in the heavens, make peace on all of us, make peace for all of us as well. It was brilliant. I was really touched. So, last January when I spoke to you, the topic, the rise in anti-Semitism in the U.S., the world's oldest hatred, was troubling. We'd seen the worst attack on Jews in U.S. history. 11 Jews killed in a Saturday morning service just like this. Now, in a Pittsburgh synagogue, now it has gotten far worse worldwide on many campuses, many countries. So I hope you don't view me as some kind of prophet of doom, he said, but rather as a harbinger of hope. But I cannot be silent about the horrific events of October 7th, the largest murder of Jews anywhere since the Holocaust. Some 1,400 civilians of all ages, genders, and health conditions killed with medieval-like savagery, 5,400 people wounded, 240 hostages kidnapped by Hamas and other Islamic terrorists. What about the promise of never again that the existence of Israel was supposed to guarantee? Didn't we all promise never again? This past Tuesday marked the Shloshim, the 30th day after October 7th, when in the Jewish tradition, the more strict memorial restrictions of Shiva, the first 7 days of mourning, are receding. Ironically, this past Thursday, November 9th, was the 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht, a previous pre-planned pogrom. Bad month. Yet Israel and most Jews, according to recent polls, 72% of American Jews, are still in a state of shock, fear, anger, and grief, gradually being replaced by unity and resolve. Such anxiety has haunted us even before the Holocaust. This ain't our first rodeo, folks. So, when I had gone to bed the night before, watched the midnight news, there was no hint of any disaster. Get up on the morning, turn on the news. I didn't have my coffee yet, so I didn't know exactly what's what. And I see Prime Minister Netanyahu on TV, and he's saying, Ezrachei Yisrael, anachnu b'milchama. I didn't have to wait for the translation. Citizens of Israel, we are at war. What? What planet am I on? It was like a bomb going off in my head. And as the gruesome details unfolded throughout the day, I thought, are we seeing the beginning of the Holocaust point two? Or am I just being paranoid? But weren't my grandmother's sister, Dina, and her husband and her 4 children killed by the Nazis in Poland? Or is that just an hallucination? The resemblance to the Nazis, the epitome of evil, is not coincidental, as confirmed by German Chancellor Scholz. Like the 3 Arab states on Yom Kippur of 1973, they relished sneak attacks on Jews on their holidays. On Yom Kippur in 1941, the Germans ordered all Jews in Kiev, city much in the news, to assemble for relocation. They were marched to a ravine called Babi Yar and all shot, all 33,771 of them. Germans are very meticulous about numbers and details. This latest attack occurred not only on Shabbat, Sabbath, but also on Simchat Torah, a holiday of prayer, singing, and dancing. But a music festival of singing and dancing, as you know, turned into a massacre of 260 young people. Hamas's ghoulish methods were also right out of the Nazi playbook. Shooting, stabbing, beheading, beating, raping, burning, torturing, gassing. This attack was meticulously planned for over 2 years and videoed in a festive atmosphere, as if those targeted were animals, not human beings. Unlike even the Nazis, who tried to conceal their crimes, they tried to bury over the remains of people who were killed. These criminals live-streamed them for all to see. Unprecedented in Israel's 75-year history, this was different from any prior conflicts that also saw vast, deplorable, regrettable casualties on both sides. We Jews take no joy in others' genuine suffering. In its War of Independence in 1948, Israel lost 1% of its population. In the United States, that would translate not to 3,000 who were killed on 9/11, but 3,300,000. 1% of its population. And subsequent wars, even more. Today, 250,000 Israelis are refugees, internally displaced, not only from the south, where the war is taking place, but also in the north, where they face another Islamic terrorist organization, Hezbollah, also armed by Iran, and also threatening to wipe out that population. Both are committed to the destruction of Israel and Jews. To borrow a phrase from the Passover Haggadah, so why is this conflict different from all other conflicts? The German sociologist Ralph Dahrendorf, writing on the violent history between labor and management, notes that that conflict could only be solved once both sides recognize the legitimacy of the other side. Management had to recognize that the union did represent the workers and vice versa. This isn't and has never been the case with these extremists. Indeed, the Palestinian national leader from the 1920s through World War II was a man named Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti, or chief Muslim cleric of Jerusalem. He incited murderous riots throughout that period, spent years in Berlin making anti-Semitic broadcasts in Arabic, in which language, by the way, I still remember enough Arabic to know that when referring to their enemies currently, in Arabic, they don't say Israelin, Israelis, or Sahyuniyin, Zionists. They refer to them as Yahud, Jews. In interviews with foreign journalists, it's the Israelis. Among themselves, it's the Jews. He even organized a SS Muslim division in Bosnia, the same Hajj Amin. So 10-7, as many fair-minded people recognize, was a reiteration of the intent, as well as a concrete example of the anti-Semitic genocide, which they have vowed to repeat, and not simply a military attack. The people of Gaza are in dire need and deserve major humanitarian aid, but they also need an end to Hamas's authoritarian rule and its replacement by one far humane and peace-oriented. Using billions in foreign aid to build a massive underground infrastructure under homes, hospitals, schools, mosques, etc., instead of true civilian needs is but one reason why people are suffering so much. They didn't spend a penny on building shelters for the people, and they're not welcome in the underground tunnels. They just have to wing it. And you can't destroy Hamas without nixing its tunnels, from which it continues to lob rockets into Israel. It's still firing every day on Israel. And absent the defeat of Hamas, we're back to ground zero, or worse. Yet I still think there is a possibility to work out a settlement for this complex conflict, even if made more difficult by this war. So why do I think that's even possible? Way back in 1918, the two leaders of the respective movements met in the desert, and they envisioned in a written statement that their two peoples could live together harmoniously. Polish-born Dr. Chaim Weizmann, a Swiss-educated PhD, professor of chemistry at the University of Manchester, was president of the World Zionist Organization, 1918. He later, in 1948, became the first president of Israel. The WZO had been promised by the British government in 1917 in the Balfour Declaration, a somewhat vague but national home in Palestine. That was most they could achieve, national home, but that's pretty significant. The other leader, Emir or Prince Faisal, son of the powerful Hashemite tribe of Arabia, led by, you remember Lawrence of Arabia, right? Led the British-financed Arab revolt against the Turks, for which he was promised a large Arab kingdom centered in Syria, but rather ill-defined. Syrian base, but larger than that. And in a famous photo taken at that desert meeting, both these gentlemen, Chaim Weizmann and Prince Faisal, are both wearing keffiyehs. I don't know why, but maybe to symbolize their relationship. And they look like brothers, Semitic brothers, almost twins. You know that famous picture of the Tsar Nicholas II and King George V that look almost exactly. They looked like they were twin brothers. And they were twin Semitic brothers. Okay? But Britain had secretly promised Syria to the French, and Faisal's dynasty had been overturned and ousted by the Saudis, hence Saudi Arabia. So he got the newly created Iraq as a booby prize and renounced his agreement with Weizmann. His brother Abdullah, the great-grandfather of the present King Abdullah, became Emir, prince of a brand new state called that means east of the Jordan, which was carved out of 2/3 of the original Palestine. He later became king of Jordan, not Transjordan, after he occupied the West Bank after 1947, 48, most of whose residents are Palestinian. This expanded Jordan was the only Arab state to let in those of the original 700,000 Palestinian refugees to become citizens. So, in fact, a majority of Jordanians are Palestinians, begging the question, isn't there already a core Palestinian state on the same land? That was way back Palestine. At that time, the other Arab states confined them to refugee camps. Today, no Arab state will host any of them, fearing for their own security. Ironically, Israel admitted 900,000 penniless refugees from the Arab states and settled them during the same period. Israel's 2 million Arab citizens have always voted, served in the Knesset, even in the last coalition government, and in the judiciary, the foreign service, in hospitals, academia, and so forth. Given the legacy of hostility and mistrust, however, they do not serve in its military and face other impediments in Israeli society. Hence, I believe they should have their own, as long as it does not threaten the existence of Israel and its people. After World War I, the League of Nations gave Britain the mandate over Palestine, incorporating the Balfour Declaration verbatim. Frequent eruptions of violence in the 20s and 30s led to various royal commissions, resulting in a partition plan, a small Jewish state, a larger Palestinian state, and an internationalized Jerusalem, plus restrictions on further Jewish immigration. Disappointed but faced with the urgent needs of Nazi-era refugees, the Zionist organization accepted that proposal. Had that been implemented, there would be 2 states, but the Palestinians did not accept it. After World War II, the new UN in 1947 devised yet another partition plan. Again, the nascent Israel accepted it. The neighboring Arab states did not and invaded it to abort its birth. The ensuing 1948 armistice lines thus became the de facto borders till 1967, resulting in an enlarged Israel and a West Bank and East Jerusalem annexed by Jordan, which never made any efforts to establish a Palestinian state, even though they occupied the area for 19 years. In the 67 Six-Day War, Israel repelled its invaders and occupied the formerly Jordanian-held territories and Egyptian held Gaza. In the interim, no talks were held on a Palestinian entity. Those peace treaties were reached with both Egypt and Jordan, which renounced any claims to the West Bank. In the early 90s, talks with Oslo resulted in the establishment of a Palestinian Authority with limited rule over parts of the West Bank and a framework that could evolve into a state. Remember that famous handshake on the White House lawn? I thought we had gotten somewhere. Later, the Palestinians, led by Yasser Arafat, himself a party to the talks, rejected it in bloody intifadas or revolts, leading to the rise of the more extreme, religiously motivated groups like Hamas, who negate the PA, Palestinian Authority, and any deal with Israel. Hamas does not want a Palestinian state. They couldn't care less. What you would get from Hamas is the Sunni equivalent of what you have in Iran, a religious Shia, a religious Islamic state. In 2005, Israel unilaterally left Gaza, still guarding its borders. The Palestinian Authority was ousted by Hamas, which has reigned ever since. Israel expanded its settlements in the West Bank, called in Hebrew Judea and Samaria, viewed by some in Israel as more essential, whether religiously, historically, strategically, politically, especially since the rise of more right-wing governments. That brings us to 10/7, brings us today. So where does that leave us? No matter the outcome of this war, and its expansion cannot be ruled out, humanitarian pauses and evacuations notwithstanding, given the trauma of the triggering events, I don't think that many Israelis, even the more compromise-oriented, are in any frame of mind to trust even the most moderate of Palestinians with a separate armed state anytime soon. Even with the generally supportive US and Western governments, but sharply divided public opinion, even violent hostility, sometimes from old friends. With the specter of another Holocaust looming, it's now an existential matter, one of sheer physical survival. There is no union or corporation sitting on the opposite side of the table that recognizes Israel's basic legitimacy, its very right to exist. My sister-in-law just came back from Israel about a week ago, where she was visiting her daughter and her 8 grandchildren. She says she's never seen it so united. Many ultra-Orthodox men who were previously exempt from IDF service now are volunteering by the thousands. If the present government falls, which I think is likely, it happened to every previous Israeli government that, excuse my expression, screwed up during a war, the more moderate political entities will still have a long road back to contemplating any deal, even assuming there are some Palestinian interlocutors to be found. With whom are they going to talk? That wouldn't be possible unless and until Hamas is uprooted and a modicum of security for Israel is devised to govern Gaza, whether via an international force, UN, moderate Arab states, NATO, I don't know, a revamped Palestinian Authority, or otherwise. Much as the Allies continue to bomb German cities until unconditional surrender, there's no compromise with pure evil. The best we can do here and now is pray. You have in hand a copy of a brief memorial prayer, which Annie will lead you in reciting. It was written in the Middle Ages, when mass murders of Jews were rampant. The word drowning refers to a method used along the Rhine, tying Jews to boats and sinking them. I will then chant the traditional El Malei Rachamim prayer in Hebrew, and it's also translated, and take your questions. And I thank you from my heart.
Let's say this together. May God remember the souls of the saving martyrs who have been slaughtered, burned, drowned, or strangled for their loyalty to God. We give us charity in their memory and pray that their souls be kept among the immortal souls of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, and all the righteous men and women in paradise. And let us say,
Amen. Who would think that 1,000 years later we're saying the same prayer for the same situation? Okay. Singing in Hebrew, the prayer El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, Shoachein Bameromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina B'mahalot Kedoshim U'Tahorim Kal Zohar Rakia Masirim Et Nishmot Achenu V'Achyoteinu Beit Yisrael שהלכו לעולמם, בעבור שאנחנו יודעים צדקה ביד הזכרת נשמתם. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבם. ונאמר אמן.
Thank you. That was really touching. And now we just open it to if anyone has any questions, any thoughts you want to share. Gary's here for us this morning.
Sir.
This concerns me a great deal. How in the world can this be resolved without future generations in Gaza coming and doing the same thing again? These young people coming up, the young men, are not going to love Israel for what's happened. Short of completely emptying Gaza completely, how in the world can we prevent this from just being a continuous cycle of destruction?
Well, as I said, I don't think it being resolved anytime soon. There's going to be some kind of transition period, but great conflicts over time have been, to some extent, resolved. I still remember what happened in Northern Ireland for years and years, bombings and shootings and mass killings and such hostility. And I visited Northern Ireland a couple of years ago, and it is much reduced. I mean, for people who hated it. Now, I did walk down the main street in that famous suburb. One end of the street is all British flags and royal symbols and so forth, and then you cross this concrete wall, barbed wire and steel gates and so forth, and everything becomes Catholic and Irish Irish Republic and so forth and so on. And this is multi-generational as well, and it's religiously related as well. But after a time when people can see the benefits, it can be over time resolved. Of course, if you keep teaching them in schools, etc., the hatred which they have been fed over these years, that just perpetuates it. But other conflicts in the world have over time been able to be solved if there's a will to do it. Now, instead of Hamas, perhaps some reasonable Palestinian national structure can be built. Remember, this Islamicist organization, like Hamas, like Hezbollah, etc., are not the Palestinian nationalists that dealt with earlier generations of Jewish nationalists. They are totalitarian religious folks. They don't envision a democracy. They don't envision public freedom and voting and so forth and so on. So that's the hope that I can see. Yeah.
You know, I know they've been fighting this war for thousands of years for this little strip of land, I guess. That's pretty much all it is. It's not a huge country like a big country. And I just can't figure out why they're doing it. I mean, what is the purpose of it? It's just a strip of land. Why won't one side say, okay, you can have it, I don't want it, and
Well, that's exactly what happened. In 2006, Israel abandoned the Strip, even forced those who had created settlements to leave and said, you're on your own, and handed it over to the Palestinian Authority. An election a year later, the people of Gaza voted for Hamas, and then Hamas completely eliminated all other opposition. So Israel already said the land itself is not that important. I told you it was an Egyptian-occupied piece of the original Palestine. So it was never part of the integral, Jewish state. And so Ariel Sharon, the general, who was then prime minister, said, okay, the heck with it. It's all yours. It's only 125 miles long and 25 miles wide, and do it what you will. It is somewhat peripheral to the overall conflict, but it involves 2 million people, and it involves potential danger, as we saw, to the state of Israel. Otherwise, it would be somewhat marginal to the overall conflict, but history did not see it that way.
So this is a difficult thing for me to say. I lived in Israel for a year in 1970. My last name is well known in Europe as Jewish, but long abandoned over here. We were raised fundamentalist Christian and didn't even know our name was Jewish.
Okay.
So I have a deep identity associated with Israel. I sat here and listened to your story and remembered how deeply many of the historical facts resonated with me, which caused me, as a fundamentalist Christian kid, to move to Israel because I felt such injustice and that other people needed to stand with Israel. With that background, I have to tell you that, and I have to tell you that Gary believes deeply. He is a witness to his story, but there is another side to the story, and we have not heard it this morning. And there are Palestinian children who are buried under buildings, and the armaments that buried them came from our tax dollars. There is another side to the story, and deep-seated hatred and deep-seated evil exists on many sides of this situation. And we need to hold ourselves as witness, listen to Gary's deeply believed story, but not stop listening to many sides, and never again applies to all innocent children.
I appreciate your comments.
I just have a question I have not heard the answer to on any news broadcast. How many people identify as Hamas?
They claim between 30 and 40,000 fighters.
That's it. And the residents of Palestine are willing to overlook their attack on Israel and not give up these people, or
The residents of Gaza?
of Gaza? Yes.
Well, Hamas is the government of Gaza, has been for
But how many residents are there in Gaza that are?
2+ million, yeah.
Are they all sympathetic with Hamas?
I don't know, because they did vote Hamas in 2006, but they have been ruled pretty authoritarianly, if there is such a word, by them since. They're certainly not friendly to Israel, but whether most of them advocate the Hamas position is anybody's guess.
And both sides are now vowing to, completely eliminate the other side. It's just,
Well, Hamas does state in its charter that it intends to intends to destroy the state of Israel.
And so does Israel. They want to eliminate Hamas to the last man.
Hamas, but not the.
I know. So my question is, why aren't those 2 million people recognizing that there was an affront, there was an attack on Israel, and helping them identify the tunnels, doing something? Because it's their lives that are at stake.
I don't know. It's a very good question. I don't know why they are, or maybe they're afraid to be considered traitors to the cause. The expression from the river to the sea, which is commonly used as a Palestinian slogan, means from the Jordan to the Mediterranean, which means no Israel. I mean, Israel does not say, or at least most Israelis do not intend to eliminate the Palestinians. And I said from the very beginning, the founders of both movements saw it as the possibility, as did the League of Nations, as did the British, as did the UN, on and on and on, as the possibility of two coexisting states. I think that is still possible, but things like this tend to push people in the extremes. But I think it's not an exactly balanced situation. The initiative behind this whole thing was on October 7th, and I think it would be unrealistic for any country, any sovereign nation, to sit back and say, "Oh, let's talk before we eliminate this threat to our very existence."
The thought goes through my mind that this is just another result of religion being taken to the point where you're not even looking at other human beings. You just are looking at your idea, and it's the only idea. And possibly it's why we have Unitarian Universalists, because we are these people. We're not the Ku Klux Klan, and we're not Hamas. And those are the extremes that religion can bring people to, and it's a major human tragedy in my eyes.
Well, I think in the case of Hamas or Hezbollah or the Palestinian jihad, yes, that is a religion taking an extreme. There's no reason why there can't be a secular Palestinian state, much as there is a secular Jewish state. The majority of the people majority of the Jews in Israel are not particularly religious. I mean, they're Jewish culturally and ethnically and linguistically, et cetera, et cetera. They observe some holidays maybe, but it's not, the religion part of it is essential for some certain percentage, but it's wrapped in to the general ambiance in Israel, whereas Hamas in particular, or any of these Islamicists, those who target the establishment of an Islamic state, are not secular. They don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in elections. They don't believe in, freedoms. I mean, we saw what happened in Iran. People, women killed because they didn't wear the hijab just correctly or whatever. That's the kind of state they're contemplating. So it's not only that Israel's in danger, as the gentleman said, people in Hamas are caught in that vice too. They had no choice about choosing Hamas except in that early election, and nothing since. They are prisoners of an extremist form of religion. I agree.
Maybe we'll do one more. Thanks.
One more. I don't guarantee it'll be a short one, but I'm kind of curious. So one of the first things I read about this online, I have an artist who I follow that I really like her music, and she posted a piece that was written by a Jewish living in Israel citizen who commented that what Hamas did was unforgivable. It's terrible. It's a tragedy on world scale proportions. He said, but we can't blame this just on Hamas. He said, our government has done things that have caused this unhappiness also. So don't just point the finger at Hamas. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, the Israeli government, which has been a right-wing government for the last quite a few years, is unlikely to be renewed when the next election happens. There are a lot of people who disagree with it even before this whole thing began. You remember all the demonstrations in the streets about judicial change and a lot of other things, and about settlements and about... So, yeah, I mean, this government is a coalition government, and not all the people in the coalition agree, but certainly, I mean, before the war, now it's a wider coalition government. Yeah, but yes, things were done. I said Palestinians, Arabs faced difficulties in Israel, and that's why I think that the two can live in separate societies within that same territory. So Israel's not totally innocent, but what changed things on 10/7 was the nature of that attack and all the emotions that sprung out of it. I also read a columnist who was a woman, an op-ed, a woman who's Israeli-born but is a psychologist in New York. She flew back to Israel to celebrate her sister's birthday, which was on October 6th, the day before. Her sister's 50th birthday. She was born on October 6, 1973, the day of the Yom Kippur, the day of the Yom Kippur War. She was born in the hallway of a hospital because on the first day the hospitals were so full, there was no room for her. And when she met her sister, that day and the following day, her sister turned to her and said, "This is the Holocaust all over again." And these are both Israeli-born, but so many people, when you scratch the surface, certainly many Jewish people, when these things come out, that's their automatic reaction. This is not the usual back and forth, slugging missiles and across the borders and so forth. This evoked profound fears and memories for almost everybody in Israel.
So the writer of this piece went on to say, and I think this would apply to all of us, and this doesn't really require an answer. I'm sure you would agree that unfortunately the actions by both Hamas and maybe the disharmony of the government on Israel has unfortunately set my children back. It may be 50 years before our children and their children can tolerate each other.
That's true.
And one small aside I have on that as far as this entire war goes, and I'm not going to say this is Israel, this is Hamas, because I'm going to go back to 2001. I had so wished when the World Trade Center went down and Bush got up to make his speech that the entire world was behind the United States at that point, that this was just unacceptable.
Right.
And I had hoped he would get up and say, we're going to turn the other cheek here. We need to talk. While we have the support of such a large piece of the world, we need to talk before we take action. We didn't do that. It would have been wonderful if Israel had been able to say, this is horrible. This has been another Holocaust to us. All of the people of the world thought it was, well, I can't say all, but the majority of the people in the world thought it was horrid. Why not pause before jumping into violence?
That's a good question.
And that doesn't require an answer.
I will tell you in my last comment, this violence did not begin with Hamas. Did not begin with the rise of the State of Israel in 1948. my father, may he rest in peace, attended a yeshiva in Brooklyn in the 1920s, okay? A very modern one for the time, okay? And he not only studied Jewish studies, he studied science and math and Latin. Can you imagine teaching Latin in an Orthodox Jewish school? I couldn't. Okay, and he graduated in 1927. This is his graduation ring. The very fact that they had graduation rings in an Orthodox yeshiva is mind-boggling. Now, in the town of Hebron, in Palestine at the time, there was a small Orthodox pietist community for centuries. And one of the riots that I spoke of in my talk took place in 1929. One of his fellow students from this yeshiva had gone over to Hebron to study in that famous yeshiva, in that small community. These were not Zionist farmers, you know, they were a quiet religious community living in a larger Arab community. And in that year, there was one of these riots, and with scythes and all kinds of implements, they attacked the Jewish community. Many were killed, including my father's classmate. And the entire Jewish community the British police managed to get to them and evacuated them all to Jerusalem. So this cycle of violence was very early, even before there was a Jewish state. There were riots like that in 1921. There were riots like that from 1936 to 1939. When you get to the ultra-religious segment of the population, of the Arab population and probably the Jewish population, all bets are off, and that's the ultimate result. So I keep this on to remind myself, you know, this is an old conflict. Thank you.
Over coffee, we can talk to Gary if you have more questions. There's so many more that even come to mind, but we have to be mindful of the time. I will go right to closing words now. These are written by a rabbi. Her name is Sheila Weinberg, and it's called A Prayer for Unity. And she says, 2 people, 1 land, 3 faiths, 1 root, 1 earth, 1 mother, there's 1 sky, 1 beginning, 1 future, 1 destiny. We pray to you, to our one God. Grant us a vision of unity that we may see the one throughout our lives. May you, source of all amazing differences, help us to see clearly. Guide us gently and firmly toward each other, toward peace. So may it be. We will extinguish the chalice. Please join me. The words are in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, that not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment, these we carry in our hearts until we meet again. Go lift it up, love bless your way, moonlight, starlight, guide your journey into peace and the brightness of day. And the postlude.
Ose shalom bimromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael ve'imhu amen. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו amen.
Thank you, Gary, for a very special worship time together. Learning so much.